What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Something About Sports podcast. It's your host once again, Leon Edwards. I appreciate you guys for being here with me. As always, before I hop into this, let me go ahead and say this is going to be a special edition episode. I'm just going to do NBA playoff preview only in this episode. Episode 8 would have been a little long if I included this plus everything else, because not only am I going to do the preview, I'm going to talk about some of the people that I think should win the awards of the NBA as well. I want to cover that, and then I also want to talk about my predictions for the NBA playoffs and what all of that looks like. I want to get into that. Before I hop into all of that, let me just say, follow my Instagram, @sports_podcast. YouTube, same thing, Something About Sports. You guys have heard all of this stuff before. If you need to email me, sasports913@gmail.com. I still want to throw it all out there just in case somebody's listening for the first time. I want to thank everybody for continuing to listen and continuing to support. Episode 7.5 is out there. I didn't do a whole lot of promo for that episode. I see that a lot of you guys still did go and listen to that, so I appreciate that for those of you guys that are listening to this one as well. But that one is out there. It got out a little bit later than I wanted it to get out, but I did want to at least throw it out there, so I guess we can call that like a hidden episode or something for the people who listen, regardless of if I post it on Instagram or YouTube. I appreciate the support. Continue to want to let you guys know that, let you know how important that is to me, because it is very important. So I want to let you guys know that as well. But without further ado, I want to hop right into talking about the NBA playoffs. What I'm going to do, just to give you guys a little idea of this, I want to talk about the playoff picture first. I'm going to talk about each conference, what teams are in the mix. I'll go 1 through 10 on the teams that are in the mix, who I think will win what games, where I think teams will end up. And then I'll hop right into talking about the awards. So I'll talk about the conferences first. I'll talk about who I think will win each side. I'll talk about who I think will come out of the play-in tournaments and all of that stuff. I want to hop right into this and get this going. I think I'll start with the Eastern Conference on this. The Eastern Conference actually was pretty contested this year. The Sixers pretty much topped it all year. But you had Brooklyn make their runs here and there, even though their big three hadn't played a lot. I've talked about that a little bit. Still interested to see how the big three looks going into the playoffs and what that plays for them. I don't think they'll end up being the Clippers of last year, but I did propose that earlier on the podcast. That might not be something that would be surprising, but I just think the talent on that team is just too overwhelming. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. So number 1 is the Sixers. 2, you got the Brooklyn Nets. 3, you got the Milwaukee Bucks, who are really playing good as of late. They've come on really strong down the stretch of the season. They're starting to integrate their new parts really well. I think Drew Holiday was a really big get for them. I think he's going to make a huge difference in the playoffs. And they get to come right back and play against the Heat again, which is something that I think that's a big thing for Giannis in that regard. But I guess let me go through the rest of the teams. I'm sorry, guys. I'm already getting ahead of myself, but you guys know how I get excited about this stuff. But I'll get back to that a little bit in that series, because that's one of the more interesting series of the first round. So I'll get back to that here in a little bit. The 4 seeds is going to be the New York Knicks. Surprise, surprise. New York Knicks back in the playoffs. Not only that, but they have home court. What a way to make their entrance back. Coach Tibbs has done an amazing job with that team. Julius Randle's taking a big step forward this year. I know some people may not follow the NBA throughout the season. It's probably hard not to hear about the Knicks being good this year, but if you didn't, surprise, the New York Knicks are back in the playoffs. You got the 5 seed Atlanta Hawks. You have the 6 seed Miami Heat. And then, of course, the 7 and the 8 seeds will be determined by the play-in tournament. The 7th seed in the play-in tournament is going to be the Boston Celtics. 8 seed in the play-in tournament is going to be the Washington Wizards. 9 seed is the Indiana Pacers. 10 seed is the Charlotte Hornets. So I guess I'll walk through each one of these, the play-in tournament to each series, give a little bit of what I think about what will happen in each series from the play-in tournament, and then we'll move over to the Western Conference after I give you guys who I think's coming out of the East. So let's talk about the play-in tournament first. You got my Boston Celtics at the 7th seed. You have the Washington Wizards as the 8th seed. I guess I'll start this off by saying I think the Wizards do win that game. The Wizards are playing good as of late. Bradley Beal's been banged up a little bit, but the Wizards have the chance to they've got a better chance to have the best player on the court in that game. And I think that makes a huge difference in the playoffs. And in a unique situation where it's a one and done scenario, that magnifies it even more. But you have 2 guys on the Wizards that any night could be the best player on the floor in Bradley Beal and Russell Westbrook. And then you got the Celtics. They do have Jason Tatum. I think he's probably the only one with that potential. I think he might even end up being the best player on the floor in this game, but I think it'll take a Herculean effort from him without Jaylen Brown out there. And the team just hasn't had a chance to gel this year. A lot of injuries, a lot of different things affecting the team. A lot of guys having to miss time. COVID ran through the team a little bit, threw people off a rhythm. There needs to be some big changes to that team over the offseason, but injuries this year did derail a lot of that. And this is a team that got better from a team last year that was in the Eastern Conference Finals. And I mean, while the Heat were on a tear and they did run through them, they put up a fight in that series. You got to at least show them that respect and chalk up what you got to chalk it up to. So I think the Wizards win that game. I think they move on and go ahead and solidify their spot to play against the Brooklyn Nets in the first round. And then the 9-10 game, the winner of that game, they, of course, then have to win a second game. The loser of the 7-8 game, which I think is going to be the Boston Celtics, will have to play against the Charlotte Hornets, who I think are going to win that game. I think this game is a toss-up, though. I genuinely think that game's a toss-up just because you have the best player in the game on the Pacers, which you guys hear me talk about this a decent amount in basketball. Having the best player on the court it's a big needle mover in the game of basketball, in my opinion. And I think the Pacers will have the best player on the court. I just don't know if they'll have the experience around them. And now I know Caris LeVert has had his shot in the playoffs before. He's been in these shoes before. So we could see him have one of his big games, end up with a triple-double, a 30-point game, and they win that game. This game is a toss-up for me. I really think it's a coin flip. I just like the pieces a little bit more on the Charlotte Hornets. I don't think they defend as well as the Pacers. I think that the Pacers probably have, as far as that 1-2 punch of Caris LeVert and Domantas Sabonis, I think they probably have the better 1-2 punch. The Hornets, they like to shoot a lot of threes. They shoot the lights out. If the three ball is going, I think they win this game. I'm going to pick the Hornets. I just have a feeling that the Hornets are going to win that game. Like I said before, though, that game's a toss-up. I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if the Pacers did win that game. Anyway, with my predictions, you're looking at a game between the Charlotte Hornets and the Boston Celtics. This is actually a crazy game to call for me because, like, with me being a Celtics fan, I like to think that the Celtics are good enough to win a game against a team like the Charlotte Hornets, who's 6 games under 500, really streaky shooting team, younger team, kind of on the rise. The Celtics are a team that have been a mainstay in the Eastern Conference playoffs now. Under Brad Stevens pretty much every year. They've continued to improve. They become more of a powerhouse in the Eastern Conference. Even seeing them in this play-in tournament probably will surprise some people that haven't watched a lot of basketball this year. I would imagine there'll be a lot of people that are surprised to see the Boston Celtics in that play-in tournament. We'll have some surprises over on the West Side too, but I do think that that's one of the biggest ones. We got the Boston Celtics. We got the Charlotte Hornets. It's hard for me to pick against the Celtics in this game. I got to say the Celtics end up winning this game. And that sets up a tough matchup with the Sixers without Jaylen Brown and limping into the playoffs. But I do think the Boston Celtics make it out. I think we see that 7-8 seed make it out of this play-in tournament on the Eastern Conference side. And then that sets up the Philadelphia 76ers, the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, been the best team in the Eastern Conference. They've had the best player in the Eastern Conference for the majority of the season. I'll say James Harden had a little stretch in there when he first got to Brooklyn where he was the best player in the NBA, in my opinion. Kevin Durant is the best player in the Eastern Conference. He just didn't play a lot of games this year. Joel Embiid missed a decent amount of games. He played enough games to make his impact, though. So that sets them up against the 76ers. I think the 76ers win that series in 5 or 6 games. I don't know if it's a sweep. I think Brad Stevens is too good of a coach. I think Jason Tatum's too good of a player. I think he wills them to 1 win. 2 wins, maybe. But I say I'll give them 1 win. I'll say it's not a sweep. It's a gentleman's sweep. But I will say the Philadelphia 76ers advance in that series and eventually go on to play the winner of the New York Knicks and Atlanta Hawks, which the New York Knicks have been really resurgent this year. They've got a really good mix of young guys and veteran guys. Julius Randle has taken a star step this year. He's playing at an all-star level, has been all season. This started last year. I've talked about Julius Randle on the podcast, so some of you guys that have listened to every episode, you've heard me say some of these things about Julius Randle. This step started last year, continued into this year. He's been working at this, and now it's showing in the games. And I'm happy for him. He's always had that unique type of game where he can do it all. I'm happy to see him be able to showcase that now on a team that's good and that's playing really good defense. And they'll be going up against another surprising team in the Atlanta Hawks, who the Atlanta Hawks have a good mix of veterans as well as young guys. Their star player is going to be Trae Young. Everybody knows who Trae Young is. But then they've got some good vets on that team as well. I think that ends up being a really fun series. You get playoff basketball back at Madison Square Garden, which is something that we haven't seen since Carmelo Anthony was in New York. And I think that makes for a fun playoffs. It makes for a fun series. The city of Atlanta, they're on fire for more sports success. The Falcons kind of took them up and shot them down, and they won a soccer championship. So I think their sports fans are ready for some more high leverage, high level sports. I think that they'll be rocking as well when those games go to Atlanta. I think this ends up being a good series, probably a 7-game series. I'm going to take the Knicks, though. The Knicks are a really good defensive team. If you haven't had a chance to watch them, this isn't just the Knicks beating up on an Eastern Conference that's just not good. The Eastern Conference has actually been really tough this year. There's a lot of good teams. Every team in this field is a tough out. So they're not going to just be, they haven't just been beaten up on the Eastern Conference. They're a legitimately good team, and it starts with their defense, which shouldn't surprise anybody that knows the history of Tom Thibodeau. That's what his teams hang their hats on. That's what this team hangs their hat on, and it's carried them to a home court advantage in the playoffs. And I think they use that to propel them to a series win. So I think you see the Knicks move on to face the Philadelphia 76ers, and then Milwaukee Bucks play against Miami Heat in the first round. This is a rematch of last year. I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit early in the podcast wanting to talk about this series. I think this is, for those of us that are fans of Giannis Antetokounmpo, I won't say that Giannis is my favorite player or anything like that, but I am a fan. I think the drive that he plays with, the passion he plays with, the want to win, the loyalty to stay in Milwaukee, that's a big thing too, for him wanting to stay in that organization and wanting to earn a ring organically, build up a team around himself and be the guy. That takes a lot of guts. In a smaller market like Milwaukee, where you take that step and you want to be that guy. When the team succeeds, you get all the glory. When the team fails, you get all the chagrin. That's part of it. And I think that Giannis is taking that on. It makes me admire him more as not only the basketball player, but as a competitor. So I'm excited to watch this because this team is the team that really came out and made him look bad last year. They exposed Giannis in the playoffs. And that's not to say that he hadn't been exposed before. We all know that he struggles to shoot the basketball. We all know that their offense really hadn't been tailored to making him successful in the postseason in years past. And I think that this year, he gets right out of the gate. He gets a chance to prove what he's learned over the last year, what that loss last year taught him against an opponent that will be tough. The Miami Heat were in the finals last year. They've struggled with injuries. Jimmy Butler's played sparingly here and there. They've had a lot of different ups and downs on their team as well this year. But I still think that's a good team. I still think that's a dangerous team. You still have to watch out for them. This one is a tough series to call. Probably one of the tougher series to call of this first round, just because the Bucks, even when you feel like you want to get behind them, they've just continued to show like there's always that shortcoming that another team can expose in the postseason. I'm hoping that Coach Bud has figured that out. And he's figured out a way to get his team to the next level going into this year's playoffs. You don't have the pressure of being the number one seed. You don't have the pressure of having the MVP on your team this year. This team can just go into the playoffs as a good team, see how far they can make it. I think I'm going to go ahead and pick the Milwaukee Bucks to win this series. I think the addition of Jrue Holiday makes an insane difference when it comes to the playoffs. We've seen Jrue Holiday absolutely dominate playoff series before, and I think he's just a gamer. I think the way that he plays the game, he can do anything you need him to do. He can shut down the other team's best player. He can score 35 or 40 points if you need him to. He can get you 15 assists if you need him to as well. I think he's one of the more underrated players in the entire NBA. I believe I've talked about him on this podcast as well before as being one of the more underrated players in the entire NBA. I think he makes a huge difference in this series because last year you had where Giannis is struggling and teams are shutting him down. You just have Chris Middleton, who he's more of a player that's built to complement Giannis. Now, he can go get buckets. He can score with the best of them. I'm not taking anything away from Chris Middleton. He's an all-star level player, really good player. I've always liked his game. I've known about Chris Middleton since he was back at Texas A&M playing in the Big 12 before they left the Big 12. So I've known about Chris Middleton for a long time. I've always enjoyed watching him play. I've always liked his game. I think his game is more suited to play off of a guy. And last year when Giannis was the focal point and everybody was worried about taking Giannis away, he ended up in a situation where he had to be the guy. And they did get a win out of that. They got a win out of one of those games. But it's not something that can sustain you. But now you have a guy like Jrue Holiday who can take that pressure off of him. So I think that you probably see bigger series from Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton, and then Giannis maybe just be himself. You might not see anything otherworldly from Giannis as far as statistics are concerned, unless they try to adjust and take Jrue Holiday away and make Giannis beat him or something along those lines. But I'm more of in the idea that you see Jrue Holiday, Chris Middleton kind of be the guys that the defense isn't paying as much attention to because they're trying to take Giannis away. I think we see Jrue Holiday make a huge difference in this team in the playoffs, and we see them finally move on and get a chance to continue to go through this playoff bracket. So the last series I'll talk about is going to be the Brooklyn Nets against the Washington Wizards. When the Wizards win that game against the Boston Celtics in the play-in tournament, I don't think anybody on the Nets will be happy about it. There'll be a lot of storylines with the whole Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant thing. You do have that, which I think is cool. And then you got the James Harden and Russell Westbrook thing with that messy breakup that just happened between those two. You got some storylines, but I think the biggest storyline is just the talent. You have Bradley Beal, who's legitimately one of the best players in the NBA. You have Russell Westbrook, who's one of the best producers in the NBA, one of the most entertaining players, and easily one of the most tenacious players of this generation. He's going to come out and he's going to give it his all every night. The Brooklyn Nets are going to have to work to win this series. I think this series probably goes to 6 games. I wouldn't be surprised if it goes to 7 games just because of the talent level. And I guess let me back up a little bit, because if Bradley Beal is not 100% coming into this series, we could see that change a lot of things. I think if Bradley Beal's not 100%, you probably see the Nets sweep the Wizards. If Bradley Beal's 100%, that changes a lot. Take that with a grain of salt, but I think this series goes 6. If you have Bradley Beal, you have Russell Westbrook. I do think the Brooklyn Nets end up taking that series. I think the Brooklyn Nets are just really good. Spoiler alert for anybody, because you hear me talking about them and you've heard me talk about them before on the podcast. The Nets are good. I don't anticipate them getting beat by anybody in the first round, whether that's the Boston Celtics or the Washington Wizards. I think if they play the Celtics may win one game, like I said, against the 76ers, but I'm tempted to say they get swept. I just think the Nets are that much better than them, and the Celtics don't have enough talent to match it right now. So that sets up second round matchups of Philadelphia, New York, and Milwaukee, Brooklyn, which I actually think that the Philadelphia, New York series is going to be a really good matchup between two really good defensive teams. It's going to be a defensive battle between two teams. I think the Sixers are just going to be a little too good for the New York Knicks. I think the Knicks will reach their peak in the second round. I don't think there's anything to be upset about in that, losing in the Eastern Conference semifinals. I don't think there's anything for them to hang their heads on. I think that is a great starting point for Tom Thibodeau to get his tenure off the ground in New York. To even be in the playoffs in the first place is great. But I think making it to the second round is even better. I'm going to go ahead and say that the Philadelphia 76ers win that series. I just don't know who's going to really be able to contain Ben Simmons from being either a scorer or a game wrecker every other way. Ben Simmons is going to be able to give some fits to Julius Randle in this series, I think, as well. I think that the Philadelphia 76ers advance to the Eastern Conference Finals. I think they're going to face the Brooklyn Nets, who I believe will beat the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't think it has anything to do with the Bucks. I just think the Brooklyn Nets are really good. Now that they have all 3 of those guys back and all 3 of those guys are healthy going into the playoffs, I genuinely don't anticipate anybody beating them. So spoiler alert on this whole thing. But I do want to still walk through that, what other teams I like or what other teams I think could win. But the Nets are going to beat whoever they play against in the Eastern Conference. They're on a crash course for the finals right now, unless something wonky happens and James Harden just doesn't show up for whatever reason in the playoffs. I know the playoffs have been a mental block for him for a lot of his career, but he's never been in a situation like this before. And I think that's unique to say because he was in that situation in Oklahoma City, but you got to think about all these guys being really young. You can name off all the names that were on that team, and you talk about a team full of Hall of Famers, generational type players when you talk about Russell Westbrook, Kevin Durant, James Harden, Steven Adams, Serge Ibaka. These were guys that could really play some basketball, and they were just young. They just had never done it before. They had never been to the finals. They had never really been there. So he's never been in a situation like this. He's on a team with NBA champions. Both of these other guys are champs. Kyrie Irving's won a championship. Kevin Durant's won 2 championships. And these are 2 of the best players in the NBA. Undoubtedly, in the middle of their primes that know how to win championships now. I just think that James Harden's going to break out of that funk this year. And I think that if he shows up as the James Harden that played those few games earlier in the season when he first got to Brooklyn, I can see them sweeping everybody. And I think that I'm giving a lot of respect to these other teams because the Eastern Conference has been a lot better this year than it has in years past. There's been a lot more competition. I think the teams will come out fighting. We've seen the Nets lose with the big 3. But I just think in the playoff setting, you got to pick that talent. You have to pick that high-end, top-level talent. And then you add on to that there's championship experience there. And we're looking at a team that's on a crash course for the final. I think the Brooklyn Nets move on. They beat the Milwaukee Bucks. It'll suck to see the Bucks lose again before the conference finals and not have a chance to play in that and not see Giannis not get a chance. But I think he kind of lost those chances before this super team in Brooklyn was formed. And now he's got to figure out a way to fight his way back there. But I just think the Nets will be too much for them. And so you're going to see the Nets, you're going to see the 76ers in the Eastern Conference Finals, the 2 best teams for the whole season in the Eastern Conference. I do believe that the Brooklyn Nets win that series. I think that Joel Embiid will probably impose his will a lot in that series, but KD, Harden, and Kyrie will just be a little too much. Ben Simmons can only contain one guy at a time. He's going to give these guys some fits. He's an outstanding defensive player, but I just don't know who else. I know you got Tobias Harris. You got other guys on the team that you believe in defensively. We got some other guys that can score. I just don't anticipate. I anticipate the superior talent rising to the top of that series and the Brooklyn Nets winning it. I know that's not like expert analysis, probably not the analysis you guys wanted to hear, but I think it's just that simple in basketball sometimes. It's the talent. The talent it dictates a lot of that. So I think that's the simple answer, is that the Brooklyn Nets are just the most talented. They've got arguably the 3 best players in the field. I wouldn't be shocked if someone tried to argue that the Brooklyn Nets had the 3 best players in the Eastern Conference field. I probably wouldn't agree, but I would see a way to justify it. So with that being said, I really don't see why there's anything else to talk about there. We know the Brooklyn Nets are going to be in the finals out of the Eastern Conference side. Let me tell you guys who I think will come out of the Western Conference side. First of all, let me just go through all the seeds. You got your 1 seed Utah Jazz, best record in the NBA this year. You got your 2 seed Phoenix Suns, who would have had the best record in the Eastern Conference if they were there. They were 1 game behind the Utah Jazz. You got your 3 seed Denver Nuggets playing without Jamal Murray. Nikola Jokic is playing at an insanely high level. You got your 4 seed Los Angeles Clippers, best 3-point shooting team in the league. You got your 5 seed Dallas Mavericks. They've got one of the brightest young stars in the world right now in basketball in Luka Doncic. Your 6 seed Portland Trail Blazers, the last team in without having to play in the tournament. They've been on a tear as of late down the stretch of the season to get in that 6 seed spot. And I think they'll make that series interesting against the Nuggets. And then you got your 7 seed Los Angeles Lakers. The Los Angeles Lakers are the 7 seed. They are playing in the play-in tournament, and they get to face the Golden State Warriors. I think that's just a fun story for basketball. It's a fun story for the NBA. It's not a fun story for Lakers fans, of course, and Warriors fans, I guess, for that matter. I guess the Warriors fans are probably a little bit more used to it after last year. They're probably just happy to see their team not fully at home. You got your 9 seed Memphis Grizzlies, another bright young star on that team in Ja Morant. They did get Jaren Jackson Jr. back down the stretch of the year. And then you got the 10 seed San Antonio Spurs, who have snuck their way at least back into the playoff bracket after breaking that streak of 20 some odd consecutive playoff appearances last season. So starting off with this play-in tournament. This Western Conference play-in tournament is very interesting. You start off with a game between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors. It's just something that you probably couldn't have even written at the beginning of the season. I think it's crazy that both of the teams are there. I think without injury, neither team is there. If Klay Thompson's healthy, the Golden State Warriors are a higher seed. If LeBron James and Anthony Davis are healthy all season and don't miss significant chunks of time, the Los Angeles Lakers are a higher seed. Both of these teams hate that they're in this position, but they got to battle it out for that one spot as the 7th seed to face Phoenix. And it's going to be hard for me to pick against the Los Angeles Lakers this early. We've never seen LeBron lose in the first round before. This will count as his first round. I just think the Lakers are a better team anyway when you talk about LeBron James and Anthony Davis and what they bring to the court every night when they get to play together healthy. It's just a little bit different than what the Warriors can do to you. The Warriors are still in a building phase right now. They're going to be able to plug Klay Thompson back in. They'll be able to plug in their draft pick of next year, and then I believe they get to get the Timberwolves' draft pick next year as well if it falls at a certain point in the first round. You're talking about 2 more first-round picks coming in to add with Klay Thompson, to add with a high-end first-round pick from this past year and James Wiseman. They're building something there. They're just not quite ready to get back to contender status just yet. I think they've got a little bit more work to do. The Lakers are in the middle of a championship window, defending champions. They've built this team to win more championships now, and I think that's going to show in this game. The Lakers will be a lot more ready than the Golden State Warriors for this game as far as just playoff implications. I'm taking the Lakers in that game. I think they probably win it by double digits. They probably coast a little bit in that one. So the Warriors will move on to playing the winner of the Grizzlies and the San Antonio Spurs, which the San Antonio Spurs have been playing really good basketball lately. They've got DeMar DeRozan, who's been here before. He's a wily veteran. But the thing is that the Grizzlies were here last year as well in the play-in tournament, and their stay ended in a tough fashion against Damian Lillard and those guys in the first ever play-in tournament in the bubble. And I think they're coming back with something to prove again. And I just think that the Grizzlies are the better team out of the two. I think they'll have the better player in Ja Morant, and I think they're the better team. I think we see the Grizzlies end up facing the Golden State Warriors, which I think is going to be a really fun game to watch. But something's telling me the Warriors catch something here. And I think the Warriors, I think Steph Curry probably gets a supernova type of performance. And that's not to take that off of the table against the Lakers. I just think the Lakers are going to have a little bit too much. But if he has a supernova type of performance against the Lakers, we see the Lakers end up as the 8th seed and they go play against the Utah Jazz. But I think in my scenario, I'm going to go ahead and take the Warriors to beat the Memphis Grizzlies in that game. Go ahead and play the Utah Jazz in round 1. So you're going to see the Warriors against the 1 seed and the Lakers against the 2 seed. What a year for it to be the 1 and 2 seeds in the Western Conference. That's just, you think about how brutal that is. You think about how brutal that is at the beginning of the year. I don't think anybody would have guessed that this would be the case, but that's how it's looking like it can shake out. Let's just walk through each one of these series. I'll tell you guys who I think comes out of the Western Conference. So first of all, it's going to be the Utah Jazz against the Golden State Warriors. I think unless Stephen Curry can average 50-plus points a game in this series, the Utah Jazz should probably win this series fairly easily. The Warriors haven't been really good defensively. They don't have a lot of offensive help when the offense doesn't get going. You guys know that their second best player right now arguably is Draymond Green, and he's just not a scorer. They don't get a lot from him as far as scoring is concerned. He's going to give you top-notch defense. He's going to give other guys fits as well, but he's going to distribute the ball too. Let's not forget about his passing skills. But as far as scoring, it's every night it seems like they're looking for somebody else. So you got Steph Curry, and then you got Wiggins, and you got Oubre, and you got Toscano Anderson, and you got the Jordan Pooles of the world, and you got the Damian Lees of the world, and all of these guys that you're looking to just try to get involved. Kent Bazemore is another one that we haven't seen, that I've seen a little bit of from the Warriors. He's back in Golden State. And you just are trying to piece together who's it going to be tonight, who's going to give us that scoring punch we need next to Steph. And I think that going up against a team like the Utah Jazz, who is not only outstanding defensively, but also is good offensively has their own great players on the offensive side of the ball, it's just going to be hard. It's going to be hard for the Warriors to overcome that. I see the Warriors maybe winning a game or two in that series. I would probably guess it goes 5 and the Warriors just win 1 game. The Jazz are really good this year. They have, probably for me, and I'm getting way more ahead of myself, they have two of the best bench players in the league in Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles. Both of those guys are coming off the bench for the Jazz. And I think right now they're toss up for sixth man of the year. Those two, they have the best bench in the NBA, obviously. They have the depth that the Warriors don't have. They have the top end talent that the Warriors just can't match right now. And I think that it'll just be too much. I think we see the Jazz move on. I think we see the Warriors journey in there. The Clippers and the Mavericks. I actually think this series probably goes 7, and we saw a really good series out of them last year as well. A series that the Mavericks probably could have and maybe should have won. There was that whole situation with Kristaps Porzingis. He got ejected in a really close game, and a lot of things went awry from there. But we get a rematch. We get to see these teams play again. I think the Clippers now, the pressure's off. I think now that first year passed by and the hype has faded a little bit. Nobody's really talking about them being one of the best teams anymore. Nobody's expecting this all LA Western Conference Finals. I think that's going to work in the Clippers' favor this year. They're going to be a lot looser. They're going to be a lot more comfortable in this situation. They'll get to play some games at home. They'll get to travel a little bit. The bubble seemed to really affect that team, maybe even more than some of the other teams that were in the bubble last year mentally. There's a lot of different things that I think factor into that. They've played a lot more together. That was a team, I talked about this earlier with the Nets. They just didn't play enough games last year, and they didn't have the top level talent the Nets have this year to be able to do something like that and expect to just coast through the playoffs. So they've played together more. I think there's still another gear that you have guys like Paul George and Kawhi Leonard that can get to. You guys have heard me talk about Paul George on this podcast before. We'll see which playoff version of Paul George shows up. A lot of people seem to forget about Indiana Pacers Paul George, but that guy was a monster in the playoffs in Indiana. We don't know what that's all going to look like this year, but if we see that version of him come back, we see Kawhi be Kawhi, this team can make a run. But I do think that they go ahead and they top the Dallas Mavericks in that series. That is a tough series to call because I think that the Mavericks have the best player in this series in Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic is one of my favorite basketball players that I've ever watched. And then especially right now, if you know me personally and we talk basketball, I've told you about Luka Doncic. If we talk basketball before Luka Doncic got drafted, anybody that's listening to this that's had these conversations with me, I was high on this kid. I've always thought the kid was going to be really good. But you can take that with a grain of salt because before that, the last European kid that I thought was going to be really good was Mario Hezonja, and we see how he turned out. But I was really high on Luka Doncic. I thought he was going to be a really good player, and he's turned out to be all that and more. I think as they build that team around him, we could see him have a Dirk-like trajectory. May not ever just be on a super team, may not ever just be a powerhouse of a franchise for his whole career, but they'll sneak in and they'll have those teams that have that shot. And I think Luka will get him a couple of championships before he's done. But this year, going up against a Clippers team on a mission, going up against a looser team that has really good players. Outside of Luka, Kristaps Porzingis has been pretty good for them. He probably hasn't been as good as you need him to be as a second option. You don't really have a solid second option that you can look to every night and say, we know both of these guys are going to show up and we need to fill in from there. The Clippers have that and some, and I think that is going to show in this game. In this series, I'm sorry. So I think the Clippers move on to face the Utah Jazz in the semifinals. And then you got the Denver Nuggets and the Portland Trail Blazers. This is going to be the first upset that I pick. I really like the Portland Trail Blazers, and I think that it's tough on the Nuggets this year without Jamal Murray. They've been continuing to win games. They've kept things going. Michael Porter Jr. just got hurt as well. He was a big part of that. They're limping into the playoffs a little bit, and I need to see it first from them. So I think the Blazers, who are playing really good basketball right now, they've been playing their best basketball of the season over the last few weeks. I think the Blazers clip those Nuggets. I think that's the first upset that I pick is the Blazers. I think the Blazers beat the Nuggets. I think they probably do it in 6. Nikola Jokic probably has another awesome series. He's going to try to will the team to victory, but the Blazers, too talented with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum and the rest of those guys. They've upgraded the defense. The defense was a big problem. You add guys like Norman Powell. You add guys like Robert Covington. You've upgraded that defensive side as well. And then Nurkic, who was a breakout star last year in the bubble, Nurkic, I think, comes back and plays well. I think that the Blazers are going to win this series. And the Nuggets did upgrade a little bit. They went out, they got Aaron Gordon. They've got a really good starting five. I just think without Jamal Murray, it's a tall task. I think it's a tall task of that Nuggets team to try to really advance far and deep into the playoffs without Jamal Murray. And I think that we see that journey stop in the first round for them. So I think the Portland Trail Blazers move on to face the winner of the Phoenix Suns and the Los Angeles Lakers. This is probably the hardest series to pick in the first round. The Phoenix Suns have been phenomenal. I know a lot of people probably that haven't been paying attention. If you haven't been paying attention to the NBA and the Phoenix Suns in the number 2 seed and you're surprised about it, just know that team is really good. They play together. They play great defense. They have top-end talent. They have middle-end talent that can fill in the gaps. They really have all the pieces that you need. Now it's just about getting guys over that hump. Chris Paul is the leader of this team. You got Devin Booker. You got DeAndre Ayton, who's a young guy who's still learning how to win. You got Jay Crowder, who's a vet who knows how to win. You got Mikal Bridges, who's been one of the most improved players in the NBA this year. He's a defensive ace. Anybody who hasn't gotten a chance to watch him play in the NBA, he's pretty much just become who he was at Villanova now in the NBA. He's a 3-and-D guy. I think he probably should get some votes for most improved player in the NBA. I think he's been really good. Anytime I've watched him, he's jumped off the screen to me. The team is really good, but their reward for being really good is having to play the defending champion Lakers with a fresh LeBron James, a fresh Anthony Davis on a mission. They're going to have to play in the play-in tournament. Going into the season, if you would have told a Lakers player they were going to have to play in the play-in tournament, they probably would have laughed at you. The Lakers are clearly, when healthy, one of the best teams, not only in the Western Conference, but in the NBA. And I think that the Suns, hopefully they can ride their momentum and catch the Lakers before they hit a stride. Maybe they can pull this off. I just find it hard to pick against LeBron James this early, if I'm being honest. And probably crazy to hear from me for those of you guys that know me, because I'm not a LeBron fan. I'm not a big LeBron fan, but I do think that they win this series. I think that you get 2 upsets here. You get the Blazers and the Lakers, a rematch of last year's first round. Then you end up with the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals, because I think they beat the Blazers as well. But I think the Lakers go ahead and move on past them. I think the Lakers go ahead and move on past the Blazers, since I got in front of that already. The Lakers probably win that series in 5 or 6 as well. The Lakers are just too good when healthy. LeBron James is LeBron James in the playoffs. Until I don't see it anymore, I'm just going with the flow now. You got to respect it. You got to respect what he's doing. You got to respect what he is capable of doing in the postseason. I'm going to give him his due. It's kind of like Tom Brady. I've been fighting giving that man his due for years. I'll give him his due. You got to respect what he's got going on in the playoffs. It's hard to pick against him. LeBron and the 7-seed Lakers will end up in the Western Conference Finals. I think their opponent it's going to be the winner of the Utah Jazz and the LA Clippers, which I think, for fun's sake, let me go ahead and just pick the Western Conference Finals that never came to be last year. I could easily see the Clippers knocking off the Jazz, ending up in the Western Conference Finals to get that all LA Western Conference Finals that we wanted last year that nobody's talking about anymore. I think that we see that matchup happen, and I think we see that be a 7-game series. That series is a toss-up. Like I said, LeBron hasn't played in a long time. I think by the conference finals, we're probably looking at a time where if he isn't back fully in the game shape, he can start to wear down a little bit in this series, and I think the Clippers can take advantage. I'm going to make a surprise pick for the finals, and I'm going to say that the LA Clippers topple the Lakers in the Western Conference Finals in 7 games. They get Game 7 as a home game at their same shared arena, but they do get it as a home game, and I think they win. I think they win the West for the first time ever. Crazy to say that I'm picking the LA Clippers, but I think this year, with them being just a little bit farther down the totem pole, they can slide under the radar a little bit. Ty Lue's been there. I know he had LeBron. I know people discredit him as a championship coach, but he's been there. Kawhi Leonard's a champion. I know that last year didn't sit well with him. I think they pull it off. I think that they pull it off this year. So I'm going to go the LA Clippers toppling the Lakers in 7 games, facing off against the Brooklyn Nets in the NBA Finals. The Brooklyn Nets eventually win the NBA Finals in 6. The Brooklyn Nets they're just too good at full strength, too good at talent. Steve Nash has his Steve Kerr moment as far as being a first-year coach, going and taking a team and taking them to the finals and winning a championship. Steve Kerr probably had a little bit of an easier job just because a lot of the framework of the team was already in place. He just had to come in and start the freedom of movement a little bit more, get these guys passing the ball around a little bit more, get some new philosophies in there. Steve Nash had to inherit basically an entirely new team. You talk about KD coming off an injury, Kyrie coming off an injury, James Harden getting traded in the middle of the year. There's just too much talent on the team, though. I think that this is probably even bigger than Steve Nash. I don't think Steve Nash can mess this up. I think that all three of those guys are hungry to win. And we'll see that early on in the playoffs. And they'll have the best player. They'll have the best player in the sport at this moment after the Lakers lose. Kevin Durant's the best player after that. And they'll have him. And then they'll have maybe the second best player in James Harden. They're just too good. The Brooklyn Nets are going to win the NBA championship, barring health. I don't see anybody stopping them. And even if my matchups don't come out the way that I pick them, the Brooklyn Nets somehow, some way will hold the Larry O'Brien trophy at the end of the playoffs. That's my prediction for the NBA playoffs. I just think that team's too good, and I know some of you guys probably agree with me. Some of you guys hate that I didn't put the Lakers in the finals or have the Lakers repeating. I just think it's a lot for a team to get the full team back with a couple of games left, and the biggest pieces of the team that you absolutely have to win. That's the biggest difference between the Nets. I know some of you guys are thinking, but didn't the Nets just do that? But the Nets don't have to have James Harden to make it to the finals. I think if James Harden didn't make it back, they could have still made it to the finals. Now, winning the championship, James Harden makes a difference there. I think that they may have been vulnerable if the Lakers or the Clippers got to the finals to play against them. It makes it a little bit better series. But with James Harden in that equation, it doesn't matter. They can ease James Harden in and still make the finals. That's how much talent this team has. And then you have this Lakers team where your two biggest pieces have missed a lot of the year. They haven't reacclimated with one another. You're going right into these playoffs having to play an extra game, maybe two, depending on if the Warriors somehow clip you. And then you got to go through two more hard-fought series after that. You're going against one of the better teams in basketball, either way, in your first series. And then you're going up against a team that's going to be hungry to beat you because you got them last year, whether that be the Blazers, whether that be the Nuggets. Now, if they get in the top of the bracket and they end up beating the Jazz as an 8 seed, which would be crazy, unprecedented, but it wouldn't surprise anybody this year, then you kind of just get the rivalry or different things like that. But if they get where I think they'll get in that 7 seed, you get one of the best teams in basketball, then you get one of the teams that you knocked out last year that wants to take you out. Then you got to go up against another great team after that. Eventually, you're going to run out of steam without having acclimated back, without having getting your feet fully under you. That's why I think that the Lakers just do get clipped in this year's playoffs. If the season went differently, I probably wouldn't be predicting it that way. It's just based off of how the season went and how everything went down for their main guy. That's how I see it. The Brooklyn Nets win the 2021 NBA championship. I'm sure that's not an unpopular pick. I know a lot of people are picking them, and that's my choice. So Brooklyn Nets it is. Next up, the NBA awards. Let me just give you guys my pick. I'm getting a little long already as far as the timing of this podcast, so I won't go too far into each pick because I want to make sure this isn't too long. I didn't even want it to be that long, if I'm being honest, but still want to get into this, give you guys my picks for each award, give a little bit of a synopsis and maybe who I think comes in after these guys, different things like that. First off, let's go with the Rookie of the Year. You guys know I've been biased all year. You guys know who my favorite rookie was from this rookie class. LaMelo Ball. It hasn't been a secret. This race got a lot closer because LaMelo Ball missed a lot of games. Anthony Edwards played all of his games for the most part. LaMelo Ball missed a lot of games. But LaMelo Ball has been better at counting stats. He's been better at contributing to wins, and he's been better in the percentages department as well. He's just been an overall better player than Anthony Edwards overall. Anthony Edwards has been the better scorer. It hasn't even been a question. But LaMelo Ball's been better at everything else. He's been better at doing everything else except scoring, and his team is winning, and he's been a better, more efficient player than Anthony Edwards has as well. You talk about LaMelo Ball averaging almost 16 points. He's averaging 6 assists. He's averaging 6 rebounds, 5.9 rebounds, so 6 rebounds, and then he's averaging almost 2 steals a game. He's second in scoring, first in assists, second in rebounds, and first in steals among all rookies. The guy's just been better than every other rookie. He shot 43% from the field to Anthony Edwards' 41%. He shot 35% from 3 to Anthony Edwards' 32%. He's been the most exciting. He's put wins on the board for his team. Anthony Edwards, over the last couple of months, he's been scoring the ball like crazy. He's averaged over 20 points a game. The efficiency just hasn't really been there, and he's not affecting the game in all the other ways that LaMelo Ball has been affecting the game. I think that this is a really close call, and if Anthony Edwards wins that award, I wouldn't take anything away from him. I wouldn't even be upset about it. I wouldn't say that it was a horrible choice. I just think that if I had a vote, I would vote for LaMelo Ball for the reasons that I just stated, but I don't have a vote, so we'll see how that shakes out. Anthony Edwards is easily in second place. He may be in first place for a lot of other people. And then I'll just give my third place as a guy who I've talked about on the podcast before, Tyrese Halliburton, who's also been really good in a lot of different areas and has contributed to winning basketball games. So for Rookie of the Year, LaMelo Ball is going to be my choice for first place, followed by a very close second in Anthony Edwards. Sixth Man of the Year is a little unique because I think the top 2 guys that I would have a vote for, they play for the same team. And I talked about this a little bit before in Jordan Clarkson and Joe Ingles. And I think it really depends on what you value and what the Sixth Man of the Year award should be. Jordan Clarkson scores a lot more points. He takes a lot more shots than Joe Ingles. Joe Ingles is a lot better defender. He's a lot more efficient and different things like that. So if the volume and the counting stats are what you value, you're going to vote for Clarkson. If the efficiency and the multi-hyphenate roles that he has, you're going to vote for Joe Ingles. I think that it's just been a little bit too overwhelming for me when watching the Jazz of how good Jordan Clarkson is. That it's hard for me to pick against him for this award. I guess the Sixth Man of the Year, I've been conditioned to see guys like Jamal Crawford and Lou Williams, and Jordan Clarkson fits that mold. So maybe just my childhood has ruined the Sixth Man of the Year award for me because of those guys. But I'm going to pick Jordan Clarkson. I think Joe Ingles probably ends up winning it, but Jordan Clarkson would get my vote. Ingles has just been off the charts. He's shooting 49% from the field, 45% from 3. He's averaging 12 points a game, 4 assists, 3 rebounds. So he's got better counting stats in the assist and rebound category than Jordan Clarkson. He's shooting a crazy high true shooting percentage as well. He's still a really good player. He still probably would deserve this award in a lot of other seasons, but he's got a teammate that's just been lighting the Nets on fire, and I would pick Jordan Clarkson for this award. I do want to say shout out to Carmelo Anthony. He may have ended up getting my third place vote. It will probably be between him and Chris Boucher, who also has been really good. I believe the last time I checked his stats, he was averaging somewhere in the ballpark of 12 and 5 or 6 rebounds. And then, of course, he blocks a lot of shots and he makes threes as well. It will probably be between Melo and Chris Boucher, who will be my third place. I think both of those guys have also had really good seasons off the bench. But Jordan Clarkson, my Sixth Man of the Year. And let me move on to my next award here. So Defensive Player of the Year. This one has taken a lot of different forms. I've seen people campaigning for Ben Simmons at different points of the year. Then he missed some games down the stretch. Draymond Green's been Draymond Green this year. He's another guy who's probably in that conversation. He would probably get my second place vote. My first place vote's got to go to Rudy Gobert, though. And I honestly think that after watching him and paying attention to him down the stretch of the season, it was honestly easy to pick him. He's still himself inside at the rim, but he's also starting to adapt more to when teams put him in those positions where he has to switch. I've seen him multiple times in the flow of the game switch on a screen and lock down a guard, lock down a wing, and really make them take a bad shot. That's the part of the game that I haven't seen from Gobert before, and he was already a defensive player of the year level player just for his work at protecting the rim. But now adding that wrinkle into it as well, I think if he can consistently do that for the next few years, we're talking about a guy who might end up with 5 of these Defensive Player of the Year awards and in the conversation for one of the best defensive players to ever play the game. I think it's that good. I think he's already been underrated as a defender anyway, just because I think we devalue rim protectors nowadays because we don't see the big burly players in the NBA as much, and he doesn't shoot a lot. So he's not a flashy player. It just translates to him not jumping off the screen for people. So I think he's been underrated as a defender these last few years anyway. But I think now that I've seen him add that agility to his game to be able to guard guards and wings on a consistent basis on a few possessions a game, I think it's something that really just adds a whole different element to how good of a defender he is. And I guess I shouldn't say few possessions a game. I think he was in the top 10 in ISO possessions in the league. He got ISO'd a lot. People were really putting him on an island a lot, and he was doing his part. It's just insane to watch him play defense. You guys will have fun watching him play defense in the playoffs. I think he'll show that talent and those new elements he's added to his defensive game in the playoffs as well. And then my last couple awards here, I want to do most improved player. I've talked about him already. I've talked about him a couple of times on the podcast now. This guy, Julius Randle, he's just another beast this year, man. I think he should win this easily. Just from the steps that he took as a shooter, the steps that he took as a playmaker, as a leader, and then as a scorer, of course. It's just been crazy to watch. The guy's scoring 19 points a game with 7 rebounds as well. It's just crazy. Yeah, so he's averaging 24 points a game, 10 rebounds, and 6 assists. All of those being career highs. He's a primary ball handler. He initiates their offense. He's just been the superstar that you needed in the Big Apple to rejuvenate that franchise. He'll forever be beloved there. He's also shooting over 40% from 3. It's been amazing to watch him play. If you didn't get a chance to watch Julius Randle play this year, tune into the playoffs. He is legit. He is a player. He's taken that step. This is something that's going to continue for the rest of his career, and you can see it easily by watching him play. He's hands down my most improved player this year. I just don't really remember anybody else taking a big step like that. Jeremy Grant, he stepped into a bigger role with Detroit, started the season on fire. He's quieted down a little bit, and I think some of that's due to injury and then also the team trying to get some younger guys mixed in and different things like that. Jeremy Grant signed a decent-sized contract with the Pistons. When they saw it wasn't going to work, they probably should have traded him to a contender. They probably could have got some good assets back, but that's neither here nor there. That's a different conversation. So I say my runner-up would probably be Jeremy Grant. I'm trying to think right now other guys who have taken steps this year. Zach LaVine is one, but I don't think this was his first All-Star game. I think he's been an All-Star before. Mikal Bridges, when I talked about him last time, how did I forget about Mikal Bridges? Mikal Bridges, he's taken a really big leap this year, but he hasn't taken a superstar leap, so I think that's what separates probably Julius Randle from him. I got to give this award to Julius Randle, and I don't think second place is pretty close. And of course, last but not least, the NBA MVP. You guys heard me talk about this a couple of weeks back. I talked about it being a race between Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic. And I think Nikola Jokic just ran away with it over the last few weeks of the season. He continued his insane production. He continued helping his team win, which I talked about. How he responded after the Jamal Murray injury was going to determine who I thought was the MVP in the NBA this year, and it's easily got to be Nikola Jokic. He's just continued to play at this high level. He's just been insane to watch play. If you haven't watched him play, which at this point I don't know how you haven't. He's been around for a few years now. He's been this good for a while. He's been in this MVP conversation before, but this year was that year for him to take that next step. The guy averaged 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists a game. I don't really remember ever watching the big man pass as fluidly as he does. You can look up his passing highlights highlights. He has full court passes, quarterback type passes. He throws pocket passes, wraparound passes, any type of pass you can think of that guards are supposed to throw. He passes better than most guards. He's in the top 15 in scoring. He's in the top 10 in assists, top 10 in rebounds. He's got all of the advanced metrics. I don't know all of the advanced metrics intimately enough to explain to you why they're so great, but he's first in almost all of them this year for individual player metrics. It's been great to watch. He seems like he's trying more on the defensive end. He's trying to be a little bit more mobile on the defensive end. I think it's pretty obvious this year that Nikola Jokic ran away with this award. Joel Embiid missed some games. He ended up missing some games down the stretch as well. He's been great in his own right. He hasn't averaged 8 assists. He's averaged a few, though, but he's averaged those 28 points. He's got 10 rebounds. He gets a block and a steal a game, which is something that not a lot of guys in the NBA can say. He shot it really well. He'd be my second place, but I think it's not as close as I would say some of these other ones were. But he would be second place. And then you got to add guys in there like Giannis, who's been the MVP the last couple of years. Steph Curry, who's just willed that team at times this year. Chris Paul has been another guy who just went and completely transformed that team. Damian Lillard, I talked about him a couple of weeks ago as well when I talked about MVP. Luka, same thing. These are guys that are still great. These are guys that are having great seasons, but only one guy can be the MVP, and this year that guy's Nikola Jokic. Nikola Jokic is my MVP. I've got the Brooklyn Nets winning the NBA championship, and that kind of wraps up the regular season for the NBA and gives you guys a look into what to expect in the playoffs when those get started on Tuesday for the Eastern Conference play-in tournament. I'm excited for this stuff to kick off. I'm excited to get to watch it. I hope you guys are excited as well. Let me go ahead and get all of the post-game stuff out of the way. Go follow me, SA Sports _ podcast. I didn't tell you guys to rate me at the beginning, so I'm telling you now for everybody that's still here, rate me, please, on the podcast platforms. I don't have enough ratings yet. I need ratings. YouTube channel, Something About Sports, SA Sports 913 at Gmail. Nobody hit me up about making a Twitter. If I should make a Twitter or not, let me know. Should I make a Twitter? Are you a lot of you guys on Twitter that are listening? I'm still trying to learn my audience. I'm trying to learn who you guys are that are listening. I know some of you guys, I've talked to some of you guys, but I want more of that. I want more feedback. I want more community aspects of this. So let me know. Give me suggestions. Reach out to me, different things like that. Really appreciate you guys for listening to this. I ended up getting really long-winded with it. If you're still here and enjoyed this, I really appreciate it. And until next time.